This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest is a favorite of ours today here on Craft Beer and Brewing, a brewer that we respect, but also a contributor this past year to both Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine and our brewing industry guide, Adam Robbings of Reuben's Brews. Welcome back to the podcast, Adam.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jamie.
You wrote a fantastic story for the Brewing Industry Guide on running into the storm, managing brewing business, through the pandemic, and shared a lot of your strategies around that. It was really interesting, fantastic read. We can talk a little bit about that at the end of the podcast. You also you wrote a brewer's perspective for us on brewing Triple Crush, Triple IPA.
Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about Triple IPAs through the course of this.
Sure thing.
We're going to talk about some of the other the brewing stuff. We're not going to talk about Goza because there's a whole other episode on Goza. Actually, episode number 4 of the podcast.
It seems like yesterday, though. It really does.
Before we get started, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River and Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and a bunch more brewers you've heard on this very podcast all trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode's brought to you by RAR North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. RAR North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and low modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweet bread, supported by flavors and aromas of hay and nutty character, suitable for any beer style, but particularly craft brewed versions of classic lagers. Let RAR North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. As always, thanks to G&D and BSG for their extensive support of this podcast over the past couple years. Along with Old Orchard, they are all returning for full-year sponsorships next year, helping us bring you guys these great conversations with influential and inspiring brewers. It was a crazy thing, but the podcast sponsorship for 2021 sold out back in October. And,
Right.
I'll tell you, this is year 3 for G&D as a full year sponsor, year 3 for BSG sponsoring, and year 2 for Old Orchard. So it means a lot for us to see folks coming back and continuing to support the podcast year after year. So yeah, thanks to all of those folks. They make great products, as you've heard from brewers on this podcast talking about those products themselves. And so it's great to have fantastic companies supporting what we do. Anyway, I digress. So Adam, it's been a weird year. Certainly a year of different challenges and, and that's putting it lightly, from health issues with staff to, broader, cultural and social issues that have gripped the country to, certainly, changing dynamics within the beer industry itself. How are you guys managing through this right now? I don't feel like I need to, start with our typical arc of history because there's a whole other episode people can listen to and get that out of. But let's just, let's start from, from March of 2020. What has this year been looking like for you?
Yeah, it's certainly a roller coaster, right? We watched on TV last night, my wife and I, this show about the history of the year, right? The year in review, but it was more of a comedy, and it's like, wow, I know the Netflix
show. We watched that the other night. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's hilarious, but it does make to think that the Australian wildfires were this year. It's like, wow, that seems like lifetime ago, literally. So being from the UK originally, when this was kicking off in Italy, I was paying more attention than most, just because it was a bit close to my original home, right?
Right.
And Yeah. Just we a week before the shutdown happened here, we already had our plan of what will happen because it was going to be coming. But
Right.
wow, it was a crazy thing to happen. But you know, this is a good test of your strategy, for want of another word, like the path that you're on. I mean, if you're on the right path, you should be able to continue and lean into that through adversity, which is certainly what we had this year.
And for you, some of that is mitigated. Your business has multiple avenues of selling beer. There are tap room avenues. There is a production avenue, and there's certainly that packaged beer. You are moving beer out into broader, kind of retail places. And so, you have, a couple of different, pillars to stand on through that kind of thing.
Yeah,
For,
there's the sort of strength in diversity model of your routes to market, right? That's kind of what we had, and that's something that's been in the back of my mind in terms of that strength, and it's a defensive safety, right? But we've generally been pulled in that direction rather than pushed in any direction in the business as a whole. So. Yeah, we could have opened up more tap rooms, but honestly, we've been struggling to keep up with the wholesale demand since then. But when when this happened, we were fortunate because we had our own canning line. We had, um, like you said, the tap room business, the wholesale business, and we were in a couple of different states as well. So yeah, we did have some diversification, which helped us in that position.
What was the biggest unexpected impact to the business? You can certainly predict taproom business, taking a hit, and that kind of impact from this COVID era of shutdown and whatnot. Were there any impacts to the business that you didn't expect, both either positive or negative?
What was interesting, so March 16th was when the full shutdown happened in Washington State. Um, what initially happened, I think, is we obviously moved to a to-go model from the tap room perspective only, and so we had a load of beers that were going to be in draft that we had to get into cans. But luckily, we had that opportunity, that ability, right? That was not everybody had that ability. But when we moved into a package only to go beer, we sold a lot of beer initially, and when we had the crowler shortage, that literally, I didn't expect that every single brewery would put beer into crowlers, and then crowlers would become a shortage nationwide, right? And that was like your only way out, almost. So I was just kind of surprised that initially, the strength of to-go beer and crowlers was really strong. Now, over time, that has whittled down, and now we're about the same as where we would have been otherwise. But right back in April, the strength of to-go beer was phenomenal. I think people were really supporting their local breweries, and it was a really it was a nice sense of community, and it has been all year, but in particular at that point, and that was surprising to me.
Spinning up that kind of business, for breweries, I've been remarkably impressed with the speed and the efficiency at which breweries were able to spin up e-commerce operations in order to facilitate no contact or low contact kind of pickup for those kinds of to-go sales. Thinking about it, breweries are typically not e-commerce businesses. They are not necessarily, most of do not have sophisticated systems for managing online sales against inventory and, tracking for, pick and pull kind of, order processing. This has been an incredibly crazy, fast learning experience, for breweries like yours, figuring out how to even accommodate that kind of sale. Talk to me a little bit about, that kind of panic and change initially to make that happen.
Um,
I think it's an underappreciated thing from a consumer perspective to look at over the course of 2 weeks how breweries spun up e-commerce systems and had to become experts at this entire, system of sales and order processing.
You kind of cheat because it's not 2 weeks; it actually is over a year. you know, so so we had been doing some online pre-sales that went back well over a year, and so we actually had been using our the online system for some time, and we did a barrel aged beer release just before the shutdown, but to avoid lines, we did that on an online basis as already. So we had already got some sort of feel for how that works. But when you said that question, it just reminded me is not luckily, but unfortunately, we lost like the tap room business, right? So the tap room business was totally closed. And there's this one time I'll never forget when I came into the tap room and the whole space, the whole physical space that's normally people are sitting in, was full of pallets of beer being picked by the team. And it was like a crazy sort of Willy Wonka chocolate factory type thing of people running around putting together these packages for then like a line, like a production line. But I think we were facilitated to do that because we had lost a big chunk of the business, and just so we had the people available, and we also had the physical space, because the physical space is a big part for most breweries, city breweries. We never have enough space because the real estate costs are so high, and so it's something that we're always struggling with. I mean, I've built 3 breweries now, and we have 5 buildings, none of which is big enough, but it's just a patchwork quilt of things that come up that you make it work, right?
Sure, sure. Let's pivot and start talking about brewing. From a brewing perspective, what changed this year? What was the biggest impact of COVID, either on how you brewed, how you what you brewed, and how did that impact the overall brewing side of the business?
I tell people that the year before we got our biggest fermenter, which is 190 barrels, and it had to be built in place because you couldn't physically stand it up in the brewery. So it was built in 2 halves. So they crane in one half and then they slide the bottom half under, and then they build it in place. But possibly the most fun part of that week was getting the 2 7-barrel fermenters in the other brewery because that gives us more options for diversity. And so this year we when you're a small brewery, like R&D, so new batches is a big part of what we do, right? It's a big part of our ethos. It's one of our 4 pillars, breadth, and we actually brewed 180 different beers this year and released 180 different beers. But what's the crazy
That's
thing
ridiculous, Adam.
it is
That's
kind of ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But we can only do that because we've got 3 different brew houses, so we can size batches appropriately. But most of those beers would normally be through the tap room in draft sales or small batches that go out to some certain accounts, right? Like basically draft sales. But most small breweries don't have that option anymore, right? That the on-premise is what has been shut down this year. So our R&D has had to be the option, that the route to selling that has been like fundamentally changed. So what's happened for us is that we've then had to put a lot of that into cans. So I think the latest number I saw was that we've released 110 different can releases this year, which is largely because that's the only way of letting people try the beer, right? The primary way of letting people try the beer. Whereas in the past, a few kegs in draft is one thing. So what we've had this year in particular is an issue where we have 3 different brew houses and 1 canning line, and getting the beer sized appropriately and then packaged means a lot of moving it from building to building. So that's like a practical element, but
why maintain that kind of absurd schedule for new beer production? I mean, across the board, most breweries definitely scaled back that innovation approach. and understandably so, for the same kind of logistical reasons that you mentioned, that the avenues for people, for consumers to sample new beers were severely limited this year. Normally, they can't go to the tap room and order a tray of varying tasters in order to try everything, and be able to check in their 10 beers on Untapped from one brewery visit, which tends to be a motivating factor, this kind of exploration element for consumers. Being able to market and convince people to buy these small batches, even creating a SKU on your online stores for people to buy it and pick it up from the brewery or whatnot. Becomes, that's a lot of work to put into something that's going to disappear, within a week. Why maintain that kind of schedule through this year?
Well, as brewers, that variety is a big part of the fun of what we do, right? So that's the first thing. But the other thing is that one of our sort of core sort of pillars is we call it glass backwards. So we go from the end product backwards, right? And by that we mean that we're not encumbered by production efficiencies or production sort of needs. We want to focus on the end result. So sure, it would have been a lot easier to not have had the same amount of variety as we have had in the past. It'd been a lot easier. But the customer, our the people drinking the beer, their wants and desires haven't changed, but they can't come now to the tap room and have that taster flight of 10 different beers, right? So how do we accommodate that? So we thought, and we believe that the people drinking and enjoying the beer haven't changed. They still want variety. We've just got to figure out a way, again, giving it to them in a different way. So whether that's through a crowler release or through having to do this crazy scheduling of packaging and labels and stuff, that we're really trying to focus on what people want, which you could argue that desire for that kind of variety may have increased in this time because of everything else going on. That's one thing that they should be able to rely on from their local brewery, is to give them these new flavor experiences and concepts and a little bit of normality in a crazy year. That's what we were trying to aim for.
Yeah. And I think, I guess we shouldn't just talk about your customers as one customer, because every brewery has many different kinds of customers who buy in different ways and have different motivating factors behind them. Let me ask you about that in a sec. But first, are you tired of trial and error carbonation processes? Then look at Quantaperm's innovative automated carbonation systems for precise carbonation. These systems handle wide flow ranges to accommodate all your beer, wine, soda, or cider styles. You can even carbonate and directly send the product to a packaging line without tankage. Besides carbonation, Quantaperm offers robust and economical systems for nitrogenation and water deoxygenation. All of their systems have an easy-to-use graphical user interface with reports and graphs that you can pull up on your mobile device. Visit quantaperm.com for more information. Also, ABS Commercial is excited to be a part of today's podcast. ABS is a full brewery outfitter offering brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts. ABS wanted to do something fun for the craft beer industry and gave away an ABS Keg Viking keg washer live this past December 7th. Congratulations to Lazy Horse Brewing and Winery in Nebraska, who are the new proud owners of a Keg Viking. To make sure you're on the list for future giveaways, go to www.abs-commercial.com, click on the Keg Viking page, and fill out the contact form to stay in the know. So from that perspective, Adam, as we were just talking about, you have consumers that engage with your product at a wholesale retail level, grocery stores, liquor stores, etc. And you also have another kind of customer that loves to buy smaller batch experimental things directly from you at the brewery. Did those things move in a similar direction, or did they kind of move, did different kinds of customer types move in their own directions this year?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. My first thought there is we got asked a lot to do rather than 4-packs, just singles. So people really wanted to get that experimental sort of element and that taster tray experience out of the tap room. But for us, logistically, that just becomes so hard. So on that end, we did do a couple of things which were kind of interesting. One of them was a 4-pack that had 4 different beers in. We usually do a rye beer festival every year, so we did a 4-pack that had 4 different rye beers in. That was fun, and I think people appreciated that they could take some of the festival home with them, even though it doesn't exist, right? So, and then on the other side, we hear a lot about flagship strength and in grocery, and that is true. So, like our first IPA, Crikey, the oldest beer that we've been packaging is up 50% this year. So you are seeing this sort of 2 different sort of customer bases almost, but some people are wanting to have something that they can relate to, and it's like a nice stable base for them, and in this time of a lot of change. And then other people are wanting their return to normal is going back to more of the festival approach, or this diversity of different beer experiences. So you can't just label one customer. There's a lot of different pieces. But what we do is we've always looked at our tap room as a trial area. So it's almost like the feeder system for more of the major leagues, right? So that's why we do so many beers, because we can try and see what people like, what people don't like, where we need to tweak things, and then things can progress up the scale. So whatever that may be. So like one example is our Helles. So we brewed that, which we named after the car shop that our tap room was in originally, Wolfsburg. Wolfsburg Motor Works it was originally, and so now we've got Wolfsburg Helles. But so we've did a test batch of that in the tap room, and it sold out well. So we did another one and dialed in the recipe in a nice spot. And then all of our brewers, that was their favorite beer. So now we're doing occasional drops into distribution, a lot bigger drops, and just to see how that does over time. So it's kind of like vindicates that model, if you like.
Sure. Another big trend this year were high gravity beers. We've watched that, consumers, especially through the, kind of shutdown initial, kind of mid-March, April timeframe, started buying efficiently, in terms of dollars spent per point of alcohol by volume. And, but if you look at, IRI numbers and that kind of thing, you see that high gravity beers have been definitely on the rise this year. Also, if you're stuck at home, nobody's driving. And so, drinking higher gravity beers is certainly more potential. Did you see any kind of, data around that in your sales or demand from consumers on the high gravity side?
In terms of barrel aged beers, we're seeing that variety, that variety being pushed into that. So a lot of different variants are very, very popular, and people want almost more of the variants than the base beers necessarily, which makes sense, right? As that area sort of evolves over time. We've seen you've seen sort of kind of separation, right? So some beers people are wanting to have lower ABV, and then on the other hand, if they're going to have something higher ABV, they want to be a lot higher. So there's a no man's land now, I think.
Okay.
I think the ABVs are kind of splitting, and we've certainly seen a push towards West Coast IPAs, and in particular Imperial IPA, West Coast Imperial IPAs. People are asking for those a lot more, and I don't know if that's in line with that flagship sort of push, people wanting to go back to what we had in the past, or whether it's that hazies are maybe softening a little bit, or people are just wanting to balance out the hazy with a West Coast. So definitely seeing that. I'm not sure the exact trend on that yet. I need to think about that some more.
Data is still inconclusive. Well, let's talk
Yeah.
about some of those high gravity beers that you brew, because I definitely want to talk about Triple Crush for a little bit. But I also, as you're talking about rye beer, I somehow forgot in the lead intro to this podcast that Three Ryes Men was one of our beers of the year for craft beer
Yeah.
brewing this past year. So let's start by talking about Three Ryes Men. And of course, talking about variants, you made an apple brandy variant of this year on your barrel aged stout. I think you sent us at least 3 or 4 different variants of that one. The kind of chocolate box series of barrel aged
Yep.
beers. You sent multiple. We've tasted multiple variants of those, and so yes, my experience tasting your barrel aged beers across that range certainly echoes what you've said about that. But I would say let's focus on Three Ryes Men, because that's a beer clearly that resonated with us, resonated with GABF judges last year.
Yeah.
Has certainly made a mark on the world of beer. Talk to me about the kind of fundamental and formative years of that beer, and how you initially created the idea for it, and then have continued to dial it and get it to be what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a interesting one because it's a concept I had in my head that it took 3 years to get to actually brew it. Just because we just never, it was right in between different breweries. So I had this concept, but we had no capacity to brew it. And then when we moved into the new brewery, we were struggling to keep up again. So it was just something I had in the back of my head. And obviously now, the way people like it, I wish I got there a lot quicker, a lot sooner than that. But yeah, so Three Ryes Men is a barley wine, British style barley wine. So it's on the less bitter side. But the idea behind that was to use rye in not an overt way, but really to meld it into the profile of the beer, being a barley wine itself. So like that sort of like toffeeness, that soft mouthfeel, that sort of fullness, everything leads itself perfectly down the path to rye, right? And when people say about rye, like we were known, it's kind of funny because when we first opened, we were known for rye beers. And then we were known for dark beers, and then we're known for IPAs. So we've been, and I've got like quotes from different articles about all these different styles. It's kind of funny, but the only theme there is we just like brewing different things, and it's like there's no real theme behind it. But one thing we have used, and I did use as a home brewer actually, I did use a lot of rye just to give another layer of complexity in a malt profile. It's about building layers into a beer rather than being like hit on the head with something very like extreme. So for something like Three Ryes Men, we're going to use some rye malt just to give some sort of spiciness into the malt profile that just adds some complexity. I've always liked
It adds
caramel.
especially when you're talking about a beer style that has a sweetness to it already, provides an additional element that helps balance against that. It's not just bitterness as a balance against that sweetness. There's also that little bit of herbal spiciness, to it also.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe a little drying as well.
Hmm.
That in the finish, because balance with all of these beers is key. And if you try all of our beers, you're never going to get something that is extremely in one direction, because balance is like a key thing that we're always looking for. So whether it's the hazy IPA that we talked about, there's still got to be enough malt backbone to support that hop profile. And similarly with barley wine, you're going to need to have it finish in a dry in a dry enough way that just makes you want to have another sip, not that it's just sickly sweet. That's kind of where we're
Right.
at. But yeah, so you got the rye malt in the base, and then caramelized rye, which is something I particularly like, and we as a homebrewer, I won a medal at NHC for an American brown, and the key part of that was caramelized rye. It just adds a little bit of maybe a little little bit of that spiciness does come through, but maybe it's a little licoricey, but just a little bit. It's a little bit that if you're really looking for it, it's like, what is that? But it's again just
I can
about
tell
layers.
you don't even want to put a word onto it, because once you put the word onto it, then that word starts to dominate the way that people even perceive it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I can see that hesitancy, to even identify it like that. Um,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah. And it's hard to explain what it is. It's like it when you kind of attribute that flavor profile to that, right? So like I think it's around 60 lava bond. I think caramelized rye. So we would normally have like C60 being three quarters of normal C60 being like three quarters of that element of the malt profile, and then a quarter being caramelized rye. So, and then flake rye and Three Ryes Men. So those are the three different types of rye, right? And that works so well because it gives you that creaminess in the body, but then dries out as well. So um, that is all within the boundaries of a normal barley wine style recipe. We barrel age it for about 10 months ish. So there's that isn't a massive barrel like bourbon hit in the face. It's again another layer of complexity. So when we won it at GABF last year, that was a year old Three Ryes Men that we actually put in the British barley wine category. So that barrel character was a nuance within the flavor profile rather than being the leading contributor.
so it wasn't in a wood and barrel aged category then.
No, 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 no.
Interesting. Okay.
It's yeah.
From if we're talking about this grist build, what kind of base malt are you using to build this from, and then how much in terms of percentage is the rye malt character overall in the beer?
Yeah, so we use like an ESB as the base, and that's going to be around probably 60% of the malt bill, and another 15% is rye malt, and then you got the specialty malt on top of that. A little bit of light brown sugar to give it a little bit of that sort of molasses sort of caramelized element as well. Again, it comes back to where your terminal gravity is gonna land. So yeast health, the history that you've got with your yeast, like how much it's going to eat through the beer. We in big beers like this, obviously the yeast is going to struggle, so we give it some help. It's the same thing with triple crush. So we know when we designed triple crush, we designed it around an 8%. We know where our yeast can get to with an 8% IPA, so we used sugar to take it past that essentially. So similarly here.
So what you're saying is that you do are you doing a multi-stage fermentation then, where it's malt fermentation and then you're adding some additional fermentables after that, or
Just in the boil.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't fed yeast yet. That's one of our kind of projects that we'd like to get to. But we just take it with an initial hit, and like this beer.
So your yeast doesn't get. I mean, one of the problems when you start doing it that way is that yeast loves to eat the easy stuff, but then can certainly not want to then get into some of the more difficult fermentables that might be there in the beer. How do you kind of manage through that challenge to keep it functioning through the entire fermentation?
It's all about yeast health and pitch rates and the experience you've got with your yeast, right? So we've like this beer starts off at 1094 and ends up around 1026, something like that. So it and then goes into a barrel from there. The other thing, and I know that you've talked about this in other podcasts, is about how the ABV from the barrel that's sort of leached out effectively dries out the beer, right? So you want to be aiming for a terminal gravity post barrel, not post fermentation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in that sense, from a perceptible level, how does that impact those beers that you put into barrels? I mean,
Yes.
1026 is a pretty high place to go into a barrel, and that's a pretty sweet beer. Um, but you're right. There's a drying effect from just residual alcohol, also tannic kind of component, from the oak that creates a perception of dryness, even though it's not actually drying out the beer. It's just providing again more of that foil and balance to that sweetness. And of course that kind of sweetness is works with that kind of high alcohol content that also has its own drying effect. But do you guys quantify that in some way, or
You can quantify it by the terminal gravity that comes out of the barrel. So essentially, the terminal gravity drops down over time because it's essentially diluted by the alcohol within the barrel. And we've found that, like, if you're going to go in at 1026, it's probably going to come out around 1020, something like that. And again, it's through. None of this is an exact science. So what you've got to do is you've got to cover your bases, right? So we're now big enough to be able to do multiple batches of this beer. So we will try and do some a little higher terminal gravity, some a little lower, and then be working on the blend that will eventually come out of all the barrels to hit us in the right spot. That means we've got a few barrels left over to play with, maybe some projects to come up. Like this year, we got a couple of barrels of Three Ryes Men that we're thinking about some projects to put it in.
Yeah, we had a great conversation with Marty and Jim from Revolution, kind of along that lines. They are intentionally. It started as an accident, but then became intentional, where they found that putting very high gravity beer for long amounts of time into barrels created a different barrel aging character and profile. So it sounds like you are kind of playing a little bit on that
Yeah.
element, doing some of the higher gravity aging that can then be blended into the overall mix.
It may only be 1 or 2 year barrels that we put in, but it's about layers of complexity, right? So there's a theme to my
Sure,
recipe development, but yeah, I mean, in our Bourbon Barrel Imperial Stout, our Bebis releases, we normally have 1 or 2 2-year-old barrels just to sort of it adds an effervescence. If you put too much in, then it might dull it. But again, 1 or 2 barrels does add complexity into the beer.
And so, speaking about time in a barrel, that longer aging tends to produce something that's, smoother, more round, more integrated, but lower amounts of time tend to produce something that's bigger, brighter, bolder. It's you can look at it, the kind of bourbon or whiskey, corollary to it that shorter aged bourbons, have a kind of brightness and a vitality to them, where longer aged bourbons have a smoothness and a polish, to them. And so, from your perspective, looking at these kinds of these ages and time periods for barrel aging beer, how does that impact the way that you either blend or identify individual products, or even categorize things, based on that kind of time in barrel?
Um, with us, it's often about the age of the barrel that matters. So it's not so much how long time, because we've got a nice process in place for the amount of time that our beer should be in a barrel, but it's a very different character you get out of a 5-year-old barrel, or less than that if it's not a true whiskey, to a 12 or 15-year-old barrel, which are 15s are a lot harder to come by than they were a few years ago, right? But so for us, we've got to get between 8 to 12 years. That gives you a nice richness. And Thor in our team, he works with a broker to get in a semi every year, and our friends. We work with some of our friends to like get the big bulk, and then they can take a few barrels from that delivery. So it's nice to be able to do things like that now. But
you're co-oping barrels
yeah,
with
kind
other
yeah,
breweries
yeah,
around you
yeah,
in order to
yeah,
get a bigger order. And okay.
yeah. But yeah. So I think it's the barrel itself, but a lot of this is process based, right? So I'm sure you could counteract, certain issues with the barrel quality if you give the beer longer in time. It's like whack-a-mole, right? That
Yeah.
so if you want to give the beer longer in the barrel, it might not be as good. So you might need some younger barrels to do that with. But like we have our process in place, and that's been working well for us so far.
Now, as an aside, you mentioned that you'll choose categories to enter beers into based on even the age of the barrel, because that age of the barrel that you've aged it in can impact the beer in different ways. From a competitive standpoint, talk to me a little bit about that kind of strategy.
Yeah, so when I was a home brewer, I all of your friends say your beer is great, right? Because they're your friends and you're giving them free beer, so it's going to be great. Right? So,
Sure,
so
sure.
I kind of didn't trust my friends' feedback, so I wanted to get more competition feedback that is from people who have no vested interest in saying it's any good. So from right when I started brewing, I kind of focused on competitions, and the commercial competition judging framework is a lot different than even what the amateur was, just in terms of some definitions of different styles are different, but also there's a lot of categories and subcategories. So it's a lot about the primary perception of a beer that is important. So what is the difference between a British barley wine category versus a wooden barrel aged strong ale category? Well, it's about what is the first thing, what is the primary flavor profile of that beer, right? So an example is a 1 or 2 year old Three Ryes Men will fit well in and won at GABF in the British barley wine category, because at that point the barrel character had rounded into the beer and added a complexity to the beer, but the primary flavor component or the primary sort of descriptor of that beer was a British barley wine. But if you take that same beer and take that 2 years off of it, it's then got a lot more barrel character that's up front. That becomes more of primarily a barrel aged beer, and then that version. So the version that we literally released in December this year, that one at Fobab this year, because it was a lot more sort of in your face barrel character because it was relatively younger. So that's the case with lots of different categories. So like I thought Three Ryes Men might do equally well in a rye beer category at GABF. So I put it in the rye beer category this year, and it didn't win. So now I know, okay, British barley wine next year, right? So it's kind of interesting that when there's a whole lot of game theory behind competitions. It's not just the best beer wins. It's a lot about what is the underlying character of of your beer, and how does it fit into this style framework? Because literally every beer we brew could fit into probably 3 different categories, and it's about that, and that's a nuance that has to be learned, and I'm still learning it, and we've been doing this for 8, 9 years.
So that's really fascinating, though, that your beer after a year or 2 years in the bottle can even change the category that you might enter it into based on how it is aging and micro oxidizing post packaging for
Yep.
you.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, that's weird, but
Yeah.
interesting and kind of cool.
Well, it makes sense, right? That the beers round out over time,
Yeah, yeah.
and it makes sense that it might round out in that way, and become a complexity point. There's one thing I heard that a brewery keeps some of its releases and only adds puts them into competitions when they're 3 years old, and then that started making me think about, okay, so what's changing over time, and how is that flavor component changing over time, and how do we learn from that?
It does create interesting questions. I mean, these are certainly things that the wine world has long ago, come to grips with. And you often have wine producers with a certain vintage not releasing that vintage out into the market until it has hit a point where the winery would like for you to drink it and that they are happy with what that wine has become. Certainly that potential is there in the brewing world. It has not been a thing just because most breweries are trying to get beer out the door,
Yeah.
and sell it. But I shouldn't say it's not a thing because that certainly is a thing in the lambic and goose world, where those beers are brewed, they are put back, they are aged, they are re-fermented, and sometimes it can be a year or 2 years, depending on what it is, before the brewery chooses to release that, and it becomes the thing that they want, to put out there in the world at that point. And it is at a place where the brewer is happy and wants people to enjoy it at that point. Um, but that is kind of a new place for beer to be. Um, in a general, broader sense, especially with barrel aged beers. Thinking about this, this modern era of barrel aging is maybe a decade old. I mean, certainly it goes back further than that with Goose Island, but with the contemporary focus on barrel aging, it was probably 2012, 2013 before bourbon barrel aging has really gained the kind of steam and momentum that it has now as a major category within craft beer. So we're all still kind of figuring out what this is going to look like. How does that
Yeah.
impact future plans for you all? Do you have more plans to bottle and sit on beers, and or save a portion of beers and potentially release those in different ways with different kinds of age statements or whatnot, to provide different drinking experiences?
We've been doing a little bit of that, but it's not really a conscious thing. I think the variant, coming up with different variants, and Thor in our team has really led the way. He's a trained chef, and so he can come up with some amazing ideas. And I think we've said before that my wife says I got a good palate because I grew up on boiled vegetables, and this, and it is true. It is true. My parents don't deny it, although they cringe when I say it. But he really does come up with some amazing ideas, and I think we've found that those are a fun position to be in, like with the chocolate box series. So like with that, it's taking a British sort of style of box of chocolates and all the different flavors in that, and recreating those, but using a barrel aged base, bourbon barrel aged beer base, which is a fun thing to do. I mean, looking at that, it would be nice to make smaller bottles and actually having a box of different chocolates in quotation marks. But that's another project altogether.
Sure, sure. I know it's hard to say at this point. There's the barrel variation that can create a variant aspect to it. But then, how do I mean? Are you building different beers for some of these different barrel expressions? At this point in that barrel aging process, are you simply using a similar base beer to find how the beer changes based on, different barrels or different treatments, different adjunct treatments after that aging process? What does that piece of building this variant, portrait look like?
We have a couple of bases that we then, so we have our bourbon barrel, our imperial stout base, and then with the barley wine Three Ryes Men base. We're working on some other bases, but what we do within that is, like I said, we have different batches that go in different ways. So when we're doing our initial blend for the base beer, sort of the main release of each style, that's our focus, right? What do we need to recreate that to be consistent with prior years? And then, okay, then what have we got to play with? And then when we start looking at that, then we so you talked about the apple brandy. Well, we had apple brandy barrels, so that went in those. So we would maybe look at ones that have a little bit more terminal gravity, because they're going to get another barrel treatment and dry out a little bit more, right? So you there's elements within the population that you have to sort of be thinking about, but we don't create different beers specifically for the barrels. You have to play with the population, and there's enough diversity in that, because just geography, just positions within our cellar will change the way that the beer takes up the barrel and thins it out, and the
Yeah.
temperature, etc.
I'm curious about this from a sales perspective. Is the growth of interest in variants relative to base beer a function of a smaller number of customers wanting more breadth within that entire category versus, rather than the entire category of buyer growing? They would, and I'm wondering about that. Do you find, in the data, you may not have immediate access to be able to track that, but are there, is there a growing number of consumers for barrel aged beers, or has that consumer base stayed relatively static and the same consumers are buying all the variants rather than buying more bottles of a base beer? Is it a way to kind of make that category broader, more attractive to the same core base of customers, or do you see the kind of variant approach drawing new people, new buyers into this category that may not have been there before, who are intrigued by the kind of touchstone flavor approach of familiar things, that like candies and chocolate box and whatnot that sound like they're going to taste delicious. How is that working? I'm curious about that. If you have any insight into it.
Yeah, I think for some of these specialty type styles like barrel aged beers, there's a finite population that are really focused on that. Um, so looking at this year as a whole, one thing that came to me, and it's people talk about this a lot, but I never really understood it, about beer is drank at during occasions, right? I mean, we've heard that phrase all the time. It's like drinking occasions, and it's like, well, that to me just sounds like really big beer, um, talking in marketing speak. But
Right.
but now, like this year is kind of interesting because the social aspect of drinking in the tap room has gone. That occasion has gone, and it hasn't just been replaced by people getting six packs in their grocery store, because six packs are up, what is that, 13% or something this year, but draft sales are down 100, almost 100%, right? So and we know draft sales make up 20 to 30%, 30% for craft breweries. So we know that we're losing out overall. So when you ask me that question about people, is it bringing people into the category, these variants? I would say, are there occasions being created where people can maybe be introduced to them? And like when you're looking at things like the chocolate box series that we do, I think totally that's kind of, these beers are for sharing, right? Which makes it even more hard this year to have their place in society, if you like. But I think if you introduce somebody to Baharat chocolate box, for example, that we did, that was crazy good, and then maybe they're more likely to try the Imperial Stout when it comes out, and you brought somebody into the craft category. I strongly believe we need to be working really hard to bring people into the category. We're being splintered quite a lot, in terms of non-craft breweries calling themselves craft, and I'm on one of the BA committees, and I feel that we as a craft industry are gonna struggle if people don't even know who a craft brewery is, what they even are anymore. And that's something that I think we as an industry need to be really focused on in the next few years. But the way we can do that is by bringing more people into the category, by giving them more occasions. I need to think of a better word to call it than that, because it sounds awful. But
Right. Right.
yeah, it's
No, I agree
So,
with you. And from, for all of the kind of whinging from, older curmudgeonly brewers about all the ingredients that everyone has to now throw into craft beer in order to sell it, there is something that is populist and understandable about the kind of avenue in that it gives just general non-hardcore craft beer drinkers, that kind of familiarity and that understanding of these flavors, that kind of draw of the idea of these things that people understand, whether it's breakfast cereal, which that's a whole nother matter, or whether it's heavily fruited beers, people understand those flavors, and so it doesn't feel as impenetrable, and for Americans, something like drinking a flat and warm British mild, it feels weird. It doesn't feel like a normal experience. Their normal experience of beer is yellow and effervescent and thin and bright, and just a little bit bitter, and so these other kinds of beer styles, and something like an imperial stout that is big and bold and has a strong bitter component, that can feel very intimidating, whereas throwing a chocolate box kind of approach to it and nutty, nut elements to it and other kinds of, flavors that people understand, and kicking up a bit of sweetness in there helps soften the approach and can certainly help people understand that these beers are more than just what their intimidating mental picture of them is. If that makes them more palatable, and I think that the other piece that gets lost in this too is that these are beers that draw people in, but people who are inclined towards craft beer love the exploration, and
mm,
if you can set them forward with one or two steps in this direction, a certain percentage of them are going to keep walking down that direction and will find some of the more difficult, and more harder to get into product categories, those beers that brewers love to make, because they are that epitome of brewing. But if you don't start people down some path towards that, then a larger number of people are never going to get there. And so, these little gateway drugs that you guys are making to
yeah.
help, help draw people into some of these other categories.
But so just a couple of things I thought about there is this year our pumpkin beer, we've kept with the same pumpkin beer every year, but we've just been brewing less of it because it's less popular, right? But
Right.
this year it was really popular and sold out super quick. And we also do a Reuben clause beer, which is a chocolate peppermint porter that sold out super quick. So like people, I think people might be wanting to experiment like that. And then, this is an argument for seltzers, right? That seltzers are maybe a way that we're going to bring people into the industry, if they're done in the right way. I would caveat, but some of them are so artificially flavored, it's pretty horrendous. And but that might be a way that if somebody has a seltzer, maybe then they'll have a fruited sour, and then maybe then they'll come into a hazy IPA or something. So
I 100% agree with you there, that I think that, the backlash against seltzer is definitely overplayed, and that I would much rather this be a product that craft brewers are behind and pushing out there, building familiarity with their brands and their craft approach to making these products. The alternative, that we've seen in the past of those products being, wine coolers and being attached to other beverage categories. If that category was the spirits world, and these canned cocktails became the thing, then those are gateways to other beverage sectors that are not craft brewers, and that doesn't necessarily, so much of craft beer is also now built around that experience of the place, and having that kind of product in a taproom environment where people can come and enjoy, and different kinds of people that like to drink different things can all come and enjoy that pubish tap room, beer hall kind of experience. I think it's an important piece of this, that's the kind of community that people seek through craft beer. And so having that piece out there, having it be attached to craft beer and not another beverage manufacturing sector, just being selfish, being a proponent for craft brewers, I do firmly believe in that. One thing we haven't talked about is Triple Crush in a significant way, and I definitely want to do that before we jump out of here. Before we do that, Craft Beer and Brewing's All Access subscriptions are a great belated gift for that brewer you love, even if that brewer you love is yourself. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button to join now. Also on the Pro Brewing side, we are excited to announce All Access subscriptions to our Brewing Industry Guide and brewingindustryguide.com, which occasionally features articles from Adam, who we're talking to right now, with new and exclusive content from writers like Stan Hieronymus, Kate Bernat, Ben Keane, and our own staff. This all access subscription gives you access to insight into ingredients, processes, equipment, trends, strategies, and more that'll help you run a more effective brewing business. With the all access subscription, you can also purchase all access beer reviews if you're tired of entering contests but not getting useful feedback. This program guarantees that our blind panel will review your beer, score it, and provide you with notes. Learn more at brewingindustryguide.com/subscription. So yeah, let's talk about Triple Crush for a little bit, Adam. And I can tell you're pulling up the notes on how to brew it right now.
If I can find them. That's a kind of an interesting beer because we have 3 different breweries, and so we've had to brew it on each one of the breweries. So I've had to scale it from a 5-barrel batch to a 30-barrel batch. So
what does that scaling process look like? I'm curious. Especially when you're talking about a big beer, a 10% beer with so much hops in it.
Yeah, with something like Triple Crush, it's relatively easy because there's an art and a science element to scaling. So you scale everything kind of, certain elements of the malt profile scale proportionally. So whether that be caramel malt or flake malt, that aren't impacted by your conversion efficiency of the brew house. And then the malt elements in the malt grist profile that are impacted by the efficiency of your brew house have to be accommodated for. So you scale everything proportionally and then reduce down essentially the base malt by the efficiency increase of that brew house, right? And then you sit back and look at the scaling and does that still make sense? Because essentially, that if the base has gone down a lot relatively, or your specialty has gone up a lot, and especially if you're getting a flavor profile from the base malt that is important to you, you've essentially reduced that down. So even though you've done something scientifically correctly, like the art of it is going to be out of balance. So something like Triple Crush, where you're looking at having a malt profile that's a backbone to let the hops sort of play off of, it's not as important an issue as something like a porter, for example, which is you're going to get flavor profile from the Marisotto base, you're going to get flavor profile from all the specialty, and the whole percentages are going to totally change on that process. And interestingly, though, our porter I scaled from a homebrew batch, from a 5-gallon homebrew batch to 170-gallon 5-barrel batch, which that's a 30-time scaling, right? So then going from a 5-barrel to 15, that's just 3. That's nothing. So the hardest one is actually the first one, when you have the least experience of all of this stuff. But we managed to do it okay. But going on to Triple Crush, yeah, the sort of malt profile again is a backbone, right? So we're gonna start, and like I said earlier, we kind of base this off of the double crush sort of recipe, because I like where the malt profile sits with that. So to juice that up, we sort of increase the OG through primarily sugar on top of that, just to also help maintain that balance in the finish. And The other key thing with triple crush is just knowing. So then you're going to get the malt profile in the right place, right? The other important piece is obviously the hops. That's 100% Citra, triple crush. So then it's all about
Hard to go wrong with that.
yeah, it's our citrus selection. So we tend to err on the less dank, the more fruit forward side. So like essentially the younger harvest side. So that's true with all of our beers. All of our hops that we select for, we always tend to go lighter, fruitier, and that works really well when you're going to really lean into that hop, right? Or it works really well in a hazy IPA. But one thing that we've been finding this year is that it can be a little, what's the word? A little too soft if you're using it in West Coast, using that sort of hop profile in a West Coast IPA. And that little bit of dankness that would come from a slightly later harvest gives a little bit more punch, right? Which works a little bit better in a West Coast, but in a East Coast, a hazy IPA, it would be a little bit out of profile. So it's kind of interesting how our mindset has changed over time. So what we're doing now,
are you accomplishing that by blending some other hops in with Citra then in those West Coast IPAs to add that character?
Yeah, so we've been playing on those blends, and we're finding just a teeny bit of Columbus is like gives you that sort of dank punch to elevate the whole thing. When we're working with hop profiles, we cheat, and people at home could do this as well. But we cheat by essentially creating a blend of single hop varietals that we've dry hopped just in growlers. Obviously, you have to make sure that beer is fermented. Otherwise, you've got growler bombs sitting around, right? But we sort of dry hop for a couple of days in growlers, and then pour that through just a bag strainer into different pints, and then work on the blend. And what I found was rubbing never really gives you a true expression of a certain hop. It gives you an idea. We missed on one a few years ago, and it kind of upset me. So we do it this way now. Every single beer with every new hop, every new varietal, and we're working on some new beers, and that's the way we'll do it. We'll create this blend in a small batch.
So for each new crop year you're doing this then?
Yep.
Okay.
And each new beer as well.
So every new beer, every new crop year, you're doing your own bench testing, growler by growler, adding dry hops with a new one to see how it impacts.
Yeah.
And so you're pulling some of that ferment wort off before dry hopping in order to do that with.
Yes, a green
growlers?
beer. Yeah, post fermentation before something's going in for a dry hop itself, right? So we'll pull some of that green beer off. When we do selection though, we don't have enough time to do this. But we've done selection now so many years, we've got pretty detailed notes like what we're looking for each hop. So we can get pretty consistent. So it's just making sure that we haven't missed something, or there's a new profile, new element of that profile coming through in the beer. That's kind of important to us for consistency.
No, that's a fun process to kind of work through that. And I love the idea of pitching a little bit of Columbus with Citra. You're not the only brewer that I've talked to that loves that kind of Columbus, Citra to mix. That there's a little bit of old school familiarity to the Columbus along with that new school fruit character that just seems to make it. On that West Coast side, what are those kind of, how much Columbus to Citra, what's your ratio look like typically to make the Citra pop a little bit more?
Yeah, it's really
just
low.
Small amounts. Yeah.
Really small. I don't have the numbers in the top of my head, but you're talking maybe at the most 2% of a dry hop, like not too much. But it's I look at it as that it's balancing out our selection, rather, so like we could select in a different way, but then it's always easier to build things up from a lower base, whether it's a water profile or whatever, right? And a flavor profile is the same way. So we've got a lot of different options to play with. But that's kind of where we're at with West Coasts right now.
Yeah, no, and there's definitely a benefit, I think, for having one type of citra, that you know how it works in varying kinds of areas, and can simply augment it with other things where you need to, rather than having two different selected citras in your hops library. And
Yeah.
from a production standpoint, I guess if something takes off, you can
Yeah.
you can use the
You can
same
balance.
citra in different ways.
Yeah.
You can always add some spice to your fruity citra. It's hard to undank a dank citra.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
um, in terms of triple crush, one of the things I love about it is just the kind of simplicity to that base of the beer itself, that it is just sweet enough to highlight that citra character, without overpowering and becoming just a giant cloying sweet bomb of a beer. It hits that real golden mean where it amplifies that hops character without becoming too heavy. From an overall standpoint, is there some secret to your base malt that you use in that? Are there any specifics to the kind of body building elements, whether it's wheat or oats or some other element that helps you kind of toe that perfect line?
Yeah. The, in terms of the in terms of the overall malt profile, it's again about layers, right? So we essentially cut like Weiman pills, so like a very expressive German Pilsner malt with North American pills, just to kind of let the hop still have a backbone to play on, but give it some complexity in there. But that doesn't really help the dryness. I would say with all beers, you need to start at the end and work back from there. So, what do you want the terminal gravity of this beer to be, and then how do you get there? So with this one again, it's all about, with big beers, it's predominantly about yeast health and knowing your attenuation rates, and really being focused on how do you hit that terminal gravity that you're looking to hit. And so for us on this beer, it's around like 10-15. With this beer, and I think I talked about it in the article, we've also done some lab analysis on the isomerization of dry hopping. So again, working backwards, what IBUs do you want the final beer to be, and how much you're going to get from the dry hop? So how much you have to get hot side. So that's an important part of the balance here, because you could get that. If you get that fundamentally off, you're going to be in trouble in terms of the finish. And then the other piece is you still need an element of sweetness, but not too much, as you said. So we use honey malt in a lot of hazy IPAs to give some of that balance, but not that caramel extreme. It's like a nice lighter sweetness, not sticky sweetness. That's kind of
Right.
what we play with, and it's just a sprinkling. I mean, I'm talking about maybe 1% or less, just a little, just to help out that finish in the palate, just to sort of round it off.
Yeah, just to make it a little more difficult for your production brew staff to have to add tiny little
Yeah,
amounts.
you
Yeah.
need to ask them next time. Yeah, yeah. A lot of that is kind of interesting because it comes from the scaling, right? So like when we were maybe on the first brew house, it may have not been so obviously extreme, but when we've scaled up and it's now a lot bigger numbers, and we've been playing with the balance a little bit more at a bigger scale, it looks a lot smaller, I think. That's what
Yeah.
I'll say. But you can get them on next time.
Sure. Well, let's zoom out, before we close here, and look at what the short-term future, and then the long-term future looks like for Rubens. Um, I love to ask that question of, as we finish, what does success look like for you? For you and your wife, as you started the brewery, you had immediate goals. You may be past those now, and you may have had to recalibrate, because certainly, with three different breweries and the kind of growth that you've experienced from the quality of the beer that you all make, the success has been there. What at this point in time, what is the next 5-10 years look like for Rubens, and when will you know that you've achieved the success that you were shooting for?
Oh, that's a big one. So, when we started back in 2012, we had no plans, right? So, like, the only plan we had was the amount of money we had to build the brewery, so we didn't go bust. That was kind of it.
Right.
So it was like I actually regressed away from my day job, which was long-term planning for a big company, and it's like I don't want to do that for us. So let's just concentrate on the beer. And now it's about creating a sustainable organization and recognizing we've got to this size now. We need to sit back and say, right, what do we really want as the organization as a whole, right? So for our team, for our customers, for the community, and we working on a lot of things. So this year we announced we're setting up a charitable foundation to give back in ways that we want to do in an efficient way. We've been working on a lot of things with the team. Like through all of this, we haven't furloughed any staff. We've kept all of our team intact. We've offered certain programs because we were finding that it was partners in our team were maybe losing their jobs, and that was putting them under stress. So we offered advanced programs to give them loans if they needed anything to help them get through this. So we're doing a lot of work right now in terms of trying to define. We know what we want to be. How does that get actualized? Like, what does the foundation what programs does the foundation do? And we've got some announcements to come on that. What does the team want from us? How do we give even more security to the team and create a long-term place that people want to be for the long term? What do we need from an organizational perspective to be successful in the long term? I still do all of the finance side, so we have nobody in the team that does any of the finance pieces. I run the brewery, and I have a head brewer now who's awesome, James, but I still do a lot of the recipe development and iterations on that side. So I'm getting stretched pretty thin. So like, what do we actually need in the long term to be successful for everybody in the team? So it's a lot of right now. This year in particular has given us a good reason to be introspective and like, what do we really want as a organization to achieve? And then I think next year is about going out and achieving a lot of that. I mentioned earlier about craft as a whole, and that is kind of important to us. Like one of our key reasons of being is to promote craft as a whole, whether that's in beer, whether that's we had up until just recently, because of the winter, she stopped. But we had a local flower vendor because she lost her local her the market was closed down, right? So
Right.
so she came every week to sell flowers. We're working on coffee blends. So we're gonna I love coffee, so we've been working on coffee. I enjoy speaking to crafts people of everything, every sort of style, or every sort of product. So like we have our own little podcast, and I spoke to somebody who's a local baker on that, and it was really interesting because my dad was a baker, and I grew up for the first 8 years of my life living on a bakery, right? So I was used to the smell of the bread, and it sort of brought me back to home. So I think for us, success is about promoting craft in all of its ways, and we can do that primarily through beer, right? And also supporting the community that supports us and supporting our team. So creating something that's going to be really around for a long time, for the long term, and doing the right things. So, and we're on a path to do that, and I'm looking forward to announcing some fun stuff in the near future on all of those things.
Well, keep us posted, and I can't wait to see what you're going to roll out. It is I think a fun thing to talk to brewers, this year, and find that the businesses are all maturing, that it is as exciting for most to figure out how to make their ongoing businesses more sustainable, both for themselves, for the staff, making them good places to work. Most of the people that are involved in craft beer now on the business side care about, at least those on the more successful breweries, you can tell that the care about creating an institution that matters to their staff and to their customers and to the business, like fitting into the broader world of craft beer, hitting all of those multiple bottom lines matters. And I think that businesses that focus on all of those things, generally speaking, tend to be more successful because they're looking at all of those things. But it's a nice piece of maturity to find us all figuring out how we take care of people, and that's staff, that's customers, that's the broader world of craft, and all of those things together. So I know it's something we're doing, and it's a weird, you get to a point in your life where I get really excited that we're able to increase our retirement match for our staff.
That's awesome.
Cover, we've been able this year to cover 100% of their healthcare premiums, and those are those nice pieces where that everyone along the way is benefiting from the growth and the success of this business is how it should be. So
yes.
Thanks for chatting with me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Adam.
That's great.
Yeah, G&D Chillers is the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Set your compass by RAR North Star Pills from BSG. Quantaperm's innovative systems offer precise carbonation. Sign up now to stay in the know for future ABS commercial giveaways, and subscribe now to Craft Beer and Brewing and the Brewing Industry Guide to support this very podcast. Adam, if people want to learn more about Reuben's Brews, where do they find you guys in real life and on the internet?
Yeah, so just reubensbrews.com is the best place to go to, and we're in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. So REUBENS brews.com. We named the brewery after our son, and we didn't think about how hard that would be to spell when it came to naming a brewery after it. But I'm sure we covered that in the first one, the first podcast.
Indeed. Well, it's always a pleasure to just listen to your dulcet voice, talk about brewing. It's been fun to talk to you on this one. Happy New Year to everybody listening. Happy New Year to you, Adam, in this final episode of 2020. Cheers to a much better 2021 for everyone around the world.
Cheers, and thanks again, Jamie.
Yeah, cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.